to know about a Beinoni. Yeah? A Beinoni is a person who has a Yetzer Hara, but he doesn't do any Averis at all. The Le'avav is a Shver Zach, but fine, let's leave that alone. But one of the key criteria, one of the key personality traits of a Beinoni is that he's moody. Right? He's not constant. Pshat Tefillah, he's on fire. He's on fire to such an extent that the Yetzer Hara could even be asleep. After the davening, the Yetzer Hara is chayzev v'neir. So there's moodiness, there's different circumstances. And I told you yesterday that the Rebbe writes that these moods could be called melucha and memshala. When he's on, it's melucha. When he's, so to speak, semi-off, it's memshala. Rak nava then. Mipnei, since. Now that he finishes davening, and the Yetzer Hara comes back. But since, shaloi loy levadei, not to him alone. Him meaning the Yetzer Hara and Nefesh HaBahamis is not mishpat hamelucha v'memshala b'hir, the judgment of being a king. King means being a pneumistic master. Memshala means a dictator, meaning a superficial master. In the city, in other words, the Yetzer Hara doesn't take. During davening, you could put Yetzer Hara to sleep. After davening, Yetzer Hara comes back, but he doesn't. He's not the only one there. The Shalkis doesn't go away. He just struggles. He's no longer as enriched and as focused as during the davening. And therefore, he can't carry out his desire from possible to actual. To become a garment for the limbs of the body, in doing an act of Aveda, a speech of Aveda, a thought of Aveda mamish, which would mean to delve deeply with his thought, but the pleasures of this world, how to satisfy the desires of his heart, which we're going to talk about machshava. When is machshava in Aveda, and when is machshava not in Aveda? I talked about it earlier, but we'll talk about it a bit later on in the shiurim in the end of this painting. So the Beinoni, yeah, and again, remember the point, I've said this already 4 or 5 times. There's 2 sets of machshava, 2 sets of diba, 2 sets of maisa. Every time you learn Teda using machshava and nefesh l'kis, in the middle of learning, your mind wanders, you shift from one nefesh to the next, back and forth, which is why we're always so tired, because we're constantly jumping neshamis. Every time you do a good thing using one lavush, and if in the middle you do something not good, using a different lavush. Okay? So a Beinoni never allows himself to become something that the levush of klipa can take over. Your Eved HaGuf, don't become a body which is garmented by Nefesh HaBahamis. Why? And the answer is because the mind rules over the heart. Says in Zayar, from birth, from the nature of one's creation, so man was formed from birth. That every person Yachal has the possibility, using the will in his brain, to hold himself back, to dominate. The spirit of desire which is in his heart, not to carry out practically the wants of his heart, in action of doing an Aveda, dibur in speech, and even to think what you're not supposed to think. Because he has the koyach, to distract his mind completely. Teves from desires of his heart, to the opposite completely. Stop. What is the Rebbe saying? The Taz is now, there's a few things you got to know. Number one, Me'ech Shat Lev is a Teva. You're born that way. That's the good news. You know what the bad news is? You can mess it up. You could forfeit Me'ech Shat Lev. Rishayim, hey, B'shus Libam, the idea that the Rasha is controlled by his heart means to say that a Rasha loses his Teva. He diminishes his Teva. You eat enough ice cream, you lose the Teva of the Nefesh HaBahamis of Me'ech Shat Lev. But when we were born, before we mess it up with Teves and Tanugim and Avedis, it's Me'ech Shat Lev. The Alter Rebbe says in Perikid Zayin, if you messed it up, you ruined your Teva. You cannot be Me'ech Shat Lev unless you do tshuva. Once you do tshuva, you can regain the Teva of Me'ech Shat Lev. But Me'ech Shat Lev is a Teva. The good news of a Teva is you don't have to do anything, you're born with it. The bad news about a Teva is it's like a person who has a talent in music and he wastes it. A person who has talent in art and he ruins it. You could ruin a talent. Me'ech Shat Lev is a Teva. It's a gift from God. You could ruin it. But you have it. Number 2. There's 2 translations to the word shalit. In the Ayin Beis, I showed one of my Talmidim who asks me a China, he doesn't trust me enough, and I have to show him everything inside. He translates shalit from the word educate. Me'ech Shat Lev, and the mind teaches the heart. The idea of a Beinoni, this Beinoni is that he learns about the Eibishter and he thinks about the Eibishter to the extent that his heart wants what his mind wants. When you learn about Hashem to the extent that you develop feelings for Hashem in your heart through the learning, that's not dominating the heart. That's educating. It's teaching. Your heart should feel what you want it to feel. This is during davening. But after davening, you don't have time to teach. You're busy. So Mayach Shalat Alev Taka means, remember in the morning I taught you to love God? Do what God says. You don't love Him right now, but do what He says anyway. And then Shalat Taka means discipline and self-control. This is called Melucha and Memshala. During davening, it's a Pnimius Dika exercise of education and kingship. And after the davening, it's Memshala, it's dominance and self-control. But both in Yanim are true. Betava, Ayid is Mayach Shalat Alev. You could teach your heart to love God, even though the heart is selfish, short-sighted, and worried. And after davening Mayach Shalat Alev, you could teach your heart that even though you don't feel like it, and you're not in the middle of davening, and you don't feel the Eibush to do what the Eibush wants anyway, B'derech Kabbalah Seil and Shlita. You understand? And this is the Beinani. Ubefrat Tzaddik Kiddush. There's another point also. In addition to the idea that it's B'teva, that Mayach Shalat Alev, a person's brain naturally rules over his heart, and you therefore, and you know what the Chiddush is? The brain is cold. The heart is passionate, and the height of passion is much more realistic than coldness. The cold brain can educate and dominate and discipline the impassioned heart. But this is especially true in Yiddishkeit, because in Yiddishkeit, in addition to the teva that comes from Mayach Shalat Alev, you push the Eibush helps. This Mayach Shalat Alev is you could use for karate, for focus, but it is especially true in Yom Avodas Hashem. Especially in Yom of Yiddishkeit, the idea that you could control your Nefesh HaBahamis with your Mayach, whether it's educating the Lev or it's disciplining the Lev, is even more. Because the pasuk says, there's an advantage of wisdom. From foolishness. In other words, he's a smart guy. But the smart guy thinks everybody is smart. And then one day the smart guy discovers that some people are stupid. When he discovers people are stupid, he starts to appreciate even more. Now he knows what smart is. Pirush, this means to say, just like light, has an advantage and a domination and a rule over darkness. Even on a physical level, a little physical light. Pushed away much darkness. Comes automatically pushed away. Similarly, when you're talking about Nefesh HaLakis and Nefesh HaBahamis, since Nefesh HaBahamis is Choshech, it automatically pushes away the foolishness. I said, Sichas Harbe, a lot of foolishness of the klipa v'seterachar, which is the next left ventricle of the heart. The Gemara says, we'll see later that every Aveda is Ruach Shtus. Alter Rebbe is going to discuss Baruch in Perek Chov Dalid and also before. The wisdom and the godly soul which is in the brain. That wishes. Limshal to educate and limshal to control. Lavada by itself, be'ir over their city. Ule slavish, and only her garments should become garments. Now, in the three garments of the Nefesh HaLakis discussed in Tanya, Perek Daled and Hey. B'chol haguf kule kanal, the whole body, as we discussed before in Perek Daled and Hey. Shei machshava dibur amaisa, which is the thought, speech, and deed of Tayag Mitzvah Teira kanal, of Tayag Mitzvah Teira. So Kedusha has the advantage of being Oyer versus Chayshach. So he says, the first point is Mayach Shalat Alev. And the second point is, you're talking about light and darkness. Light is much, much stronger. You're going to have this Tanya Perikov test. Alter Rebbe says that when light and darkness have a fight, light always wins. In fact, when light and darkness have a fight, there's no fight. All you got to do is bring light and the light darkness vanishes. Kedusha and Klipa on the highest level is light and darkness. So since Kedusha and Klipa is light and darkness, the Mayach Shalat Alev is made much easier because you're fighting against nothing. What's the reality of Klipa? What's the reality of a lie? That people believe it. If nobody believes a lie, it doesn't exist. If you go show everybody a lie, lies don't have to be destroyed. Lies have to be exposed. When a lie is exposed, it's nothing. Yeah? What's the reality of truth? Nobody has to know a truth for the truth to be. The truth is real. The rule of Mayach Shalat Alev is truth throughout. It's truth throughout. But in Kedusha and Klipa, you're dealing with truth versus a lie. You expose the truth, the lie automatically vanishes. So in addition to the ordinary Maila, Mayach, Shalat Alev, there is the additional Maila that you're really fighting against nothing. It seems like something. You're right, but the point of the fight is not to defeat it. The point of the fight is to reveal that it's nothing, and the B'meila goes away. Okay, so what did we learn today briefly? That after davening, you're no longer a melech, you're a Moshe, because of Mayach, Shalat Alev, and especially in the struggle with Kedusha and Klipa, because it's light fighting with darkness.